If I then take those same ideas and I type them on Twitter or I put them in an email, it's free speech. There's no difference for me taking those same ideas and writing it as computer code. It's still protected under free speech. And so if you really boil down at its most basic level, what is Bitcoin? Bitcoin is computer code.
Metablazers has touched down.
What's up, everyone? Today we got myself, we got Moonshot as usual, we got special guest Pomp in the house. Pomp, thank you for doing this, brother. We're going to get right into the heat. That's cool with you.
Let's do it.
Let's do it. All right. First things first. Everybody wants to know, how does a finance Bitcoin guy like yourself get in the room with these influencers? How did you meet your first big influencer? It's not every day that you see a finance guy talking to murder beats. How'd you meet your first big influencer? How does this happen?
Yeah, I don't really think about it that way. Maybe that's a good thing or a bad thing. If you really think about kind of my life, I've had multiple careers or kind of different interests along the way. So I played football in college. I was in the military. I started companies. I invested in companies. Obviously, all the Bitcoin crypto stuff. So it's just kind of the culmination of all those different interests. And ultimately what you find is that there's a bunch of other people who are interested in all that stuff too, right? They're interested in sports. They're interested in finance. They're interested in investing, building companies, whatever. And so I think naturally, those interests overlay with each other. And what you realize is that as you kind of earn the opportunity to be in certain rooms, to meet certain people, you start to really realize, I think, the value of having relationships with various folks. But also it's you can learn from folks. So, I don't want to speak for Murder Beats, but whether it's him or other folks like him, I think that they look at it as they can learn something from me in a specific kind of sector or a specific discipline. And I look at it the same way. I can learn something from them. And so really what it is it ends up becoming a friendship that's built on having the ability to learn from each other. And then it becomes fun because you basically want to see that person win. They want to see you win. And from there, then kind of just takes over and you're cheering for each other.
Yeah, facts. So follow-up question to that then, it's what do you think it is, and not just you specifically, but just in general about kind of this Bitcoin finance revolution that's going on? Why are these guys paying attention to this stuff now, right? Why do they care? You're saying they can learn from you, but why do guys like that care? What's kind of the general sentiment amongst these influencer type people?
Yeah, I mean, listen, the big thing is just ultimately in the, 90s, everyone was super interested in Wall Street into the 2000s. Then everyone was super obsessed with Silicon Valley in the 2000s into the 2010s. Now it's, Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies. In the future, it'll be other stuff, right? It's kind of just there's a moment where you get a culmination of some technology or an industry infiltrating culture. So, Wall Street did that because everyone was aspirational in wanting to be like Wall Street. They wanted to be rich. They wanted to have the car. They wanted to have the nice suit, the watch, all that stuff. Now what we're seeing is there's aspiration, whether it's I want to own a specific, crypto punk or a Bored Ape, or I want to own Bitcoin, or I want to get paid in Bitcoin. There's this aspirational kind of intersection with culture, et cetera. And then also it's just economic incentive. People want to get rich, right? And that's never going to change. It's just human nature. That doesn't mean that you're going to get rich. It just means that's why people are paying attention to it. And so if you talk to an athlete, a musician, you talk to a finance person, a technologist, whoever, every single person gets there for a different reason. But ultimately, when they get there, I think you can just kind of feel the energy in terms of the momentum of talent, the momentum of capital, the momentum of kind of innovation. And when you see it, you know it. And you're just Dan, this is where I need to be right now. And 20 years from now, we're all going to look at this industry and be that stuff is so antiquated, right? It's the bond market. It's Wall Street. It's even now somebody's you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go build a gaming company on top of Facebook. Sure, you probably could be successful, be man, that was Zynga in 2010, right? Yeah. And so now it's this stuff, and eventually it'll be something else. And so I think it's just a moment in time. People get excited about it. It seems to be the right place at this moment, and then we'll see what happens in the future.
let me ask you, I mean, obviously we're going through the hype cycle of Bitcoin and NFTs and everything, but the thing is, it feels like NFTs right now are kind of on the downward spiral, especially in some particular projects. I don't want to name any in particular, but where do you see the next generation? So it was like Bitcoin, Ethereum, and there's all these other ICOs came out, and then obviously NFTs are having their moment. What do you see as the next thing? Is it the metaverse?
No, I mean, look, I actually think that what we're going to watch happen here is like a bifurcation in the market. So I think that you're going to see a heavy rotation back to interest in Bitcoin, not necessarily like financial capital only, but just people realizing how important a non-sovereign, decentralized digital currency is. Like we're seeing it right now, Canada running a marketing campaign for Bitcoin. Sanctions, running a marketing campaign for Bitcoin. And so I think that it's this weird thing where in the beginning, you agree with those doing the financial censorship. If you're in the United States, you're like, yes, we should sanction these countries, right? We should go after these individuals. This is a good thing. They're violating my view of good and evil. If you're in Canada and you're living in Ottawa and they're honking outside your, apartment complex, you're like, dude, get these people the hell out of here, right? And so it feels good when it's somebody on your side, right? Whatever that means in the certain situation. The problem is that you've got to actually flip around and say, am I willing to give this power or this censorship capability to my enemy? If they can use it against me, do I want them to have this ability? And usually the answer is no. And so think in politics, for example, if you take it at the most basic level, what we're watching is we're watching politicians, whether it's their citizens, other companies, or other nation states, and they are censoring them because they don't agree with the same kind of view of the world. And so China is censoring through sanctions US defense contractors that are selling equipment to Taiwan. The United States is censoring through sanctions Russia, Russian oligarchs, etc. The Canadian government is sanctioning citizens that they don't agree with or that are dissenting from their view of the world. And so that's all fine if you agree with those viewpoints. But what happens when all of a sudden the next political party gets into power in Canada and they turn around and they say, oh, now we're going to sanction you? And it just becomes this back and forth thing of whoever's in power. And so ultimately what you get is this slippery slope where financial sanctions become the standard or the default. And I don't think that's a world that anyone wants to live in because it gives your enemy the ability to sanction you. And that's just not a good, healthy place to be. So I do think that there will be kind of this rotation back in intellectual interest in Bitcoin because it'll become more and more prevalent in the world and more important. The other thing that I think is going to happen in terms of this bifurcation, so that's one is almost this decentralized, censorship resistant type technology, open source, etc. The other thing is what we're going to start to realize is there's actually no need for decentralization in a lot of different products. What you need is efficiency. And the way you get efficiency is through centralization. Amazon's a super centralized company. It's one of the most efficient companies in the world, happens to be one of the most valuable companies in the world and one of the best performing stocks over the last 20 years. Why? Because it's fucking centralized. It's hierarchical structure. There's leadership. All these timeless principles still apply. The real reason you need decentralization is for security. Because you literally are trying to anticipate a nation state attack or some sort of catastrophic external shock. But most companies, most products, they don't need that. What they need is efficiency. They need to be fast. They need to be cheap. They need to be able to deliver their promise to their customers in a way that makes the customer happy and makes the customer come back. And so when you start to think about that, I think that there's this world of kind of return or a return to centralization, but it's not done from a normal structure. We'll still get technology upgrades, but take NFTs as an example. Do people really care if the NFT is decentralized or if it just settles on the fastest blockchain? How many people are actually holding them because they're decentralized? Probably not that many people, maybe somebody, right? But for the most part, people are holding them because they like them or they think that they're going to grow up in value. That's the two reasons, entertainment or capitalism. And so ultimately, you don't need decentralization in that standpoint. And so what you're going to get is you're going to get people continuously pursuing efficiency and performance, which leads to centralization. And so like, I think you can envision this as like a bifurcation of centralization, decentralization. You can do it in terms of like something that's important versus something that's going to make you a lot of money. However you break it up, I think there's going to be a bifurcation in the market, and that's good for both sides. Like, I don't think that NFTs and DAOs and metaverses and all this stuff wants to be tied up with like where Bitcoin is going. Like, if Bitcoin becomes this like geopolitical chess piece, if you're like just like, hey man, I just want to build like JPEGs on the internet, like you don't want to play that game. Like you don't want to be in the middle of like a geopolitical chess game, right? And so naturally, like you want the bifurcation. If you're Bitcoin, you don't want to be thrown in with the NFTs and the metaverse and all that stuff. You want to say like, look, we have this importance in the world and we're going after something very specific. And so like, who knows exactly how it's going to play out, but I think that that's like a big trend that's coming that a lot of people aren't talking about yet.
Yeah. Holy crap. Talk about knowledge bombs. Holy shit. That is it, my guy. So that actually kind of leads into like the next question that we had here, which is, well, actually, last time we saw you in Miami, you said something really interesting to us. You said code is free speech, which kind of leads into what you were just talking about. And one thing that a bunch of critics are saying right now is, I think you touched on it, but I'm curious to get a more detailed answer, is that people are saying Bitcoin's failing to fulfill the promise of being decentralized, right? People are saying, looking at these corrupt entities in the world right now, whether it's, a country, a company, whatever it might be, people are going, hey, it's like not fulfilling its promise. So what do you think about that? Or what do you say to those critics who are saying, hey, this thing's not, meeting expectations or meeting this decentralized thing that it's promised?
Yeah. So there's an important kind of legal history here. There's a case, I think it is, if I remember correctly, I think it's Bernstein versus the DOJ or Bernstein versus like the US government. And this is probably, I don't know, 30 years old, 25, 30 years old case now.
Yeah.
And what it essentially did was it established code is free speech. And what it really means is like, if I write something with a pen and paper, right, I am protected under free speech. If I then take those same ideas and I type them on Twitter or I put them in an email, it's free speech. There's no difference for me taking those same ideas and writing it as computer code. It's still protected under free speech. And so if you really boil down at its most basic level, what is Bitcoin? Bitcoin is computer code. Now, you may assign value to the computer code that you hold in a self-custody way. I may think it's worthless, but ultimately, when you boil it down, it is computer code, and therefore it is free speech. And so like, it's a pretty open and shut situation in terms of code is free speech. And if Bitcoin is code, then therefore Bitcoin is free speech. And so like, I think that that is a component of the conversation that a lot of people don't realize or think through, is like any adverse action in terms of trying to ban ownership, et cetera, of these assets would be a direct violation of the protections of the Constitution around free speech. And so I think that like that is a really unique part of the world that we're headed to, where ultimately there is a separation of what the rights of an individual are from traditional assets. You still have the rights, you just may not be expressing your rights via the old assets. Now you're expressing it through these new assets. So I think that that's very much true. And ultimately, I also think we're headed to this world where the government is made up of citizens. Now, you can argue it has too much power, it has too little power, however you think, usually determined by which side of the aisle you're on, all this stuff. I'm an independent. I don't give a shit about either side of the aisle. They're both moving more extremist, in my opinion. And I think that we could do a lot better by just kind of coming back to the middle and kind of being rational, right? Or in centrist in some view of the world. But you can admit, regardless of where you are on that spectrum, that the government is made of elected officials, as elected officials are citizens. And just like I need Bitcoin, just like you guys need Bitcoin, just like corporations, financial institutions, organizations need Bitcoin, the nation states and the government officials are going to need Bitcoin as well. And so what you get is this weird world where ultimately the incentives take over. And so people naturally begin to adopt it. And today we already have it. We're 13 years into Bitcoin. We already have politicians, both congressmen and senators at the state and national level that hold Bitcoin. Who would have thought that that was going to happen? We have public companies with it on their balance sheet. We have countries that are buying Bitcoin and making it legal tender, right? We have financial organizations, all of the major financial organizations buying this stuff. And so ultimately what you see is you see this world where this is not going away. And if you just look out over 20 years, the direction that we are headed is more adoption. More adoption ends up meaning that adoption begets adoption, because money is the most viral product in the world. And so if I adopt it, what do? I either hold it or I send it to people. And so naturally you just get this continued growth of the asset, which I think a lot of people are just discounting because they don't understand a lot of the kind of structural nuance that's at play here.
Yep. Makes a ton of sense. So let's talk about adoption for a moment. So, at the beginning of kind of this little monologue here, we established code is free speech, Bitcoin's code, therefore Bitcoin is free speech. But I think generally as well, one thing that a lot of people are saying is, well, I don't know how to adopt Bitcoin, or there's kind of this inherent barrier to entry when it comes to like code or Bitcoin kind of as a whole. So when you think about adoption, what do you think that looks like, I guess, really over the next year, because things are really interesting right now, 5 years, and then kind of 10 years? Do you think it's going to be, easier to adopt? Do you think people, we actually, we see companies like Strike, Rollfly making it easier for people to adopt like Bitcoin and stuff, right? So like, what do you think about the adoption over the next year, 5 years, 10 years?
Short answer is I don't know. I think that I can basically tell you from a probability standpoint that it is very likely that it will have more adoption rather than less. Yeah. I think that naturally what you got was a reverse in the sequence of adoption. So normally it is, countries or large organizations, and then it trickles down to the individuals. What we got here was the opposite. We got individuals, then we got organizations, and then nation states. Actually, the nation states are the last one. And so what occurs is, if you think about that in terms of like overlaying the amount of capital each one of those buckets have, is that there's a likelihood that you're actually going to get exponential growth over time, because the people who are coming to the table now, they have more money. And so that's the opposite of normally what happens. Rather than have like almost like a diminishing return, you have this like exponential growth of return. And so what that leads to is this idea of like, people call it hyper Bitcoinization, they call it a super cycle, whatever. I don't know what you want to call it, but I do think that if you look out 10 years, we're all drastically underestimating what is going to become of this. And that's true of Bitcoin. That's true of the larger kind of crypto market. That's true of the equity infrastructure companies in this space. It's really, really hard to kind of sit here and say 10 years from now, here's what's going to happen. Imagine in 2000, if I told you that somebody was going to create an electric vehicle company, right? And it was going to be worth $1 trillion. You'd be like, dude, that's crazy, right? Facts. If I told you that Facebook was a company that literally started out as a product to decide whether you were hot or not, was going to basically end up being, $1 trillion company, you'd be like, what? And so like this whole thing is that if we are underestimating it, the question then is just how big can it get? And I like to think that not only will Bitcoin eat into the market share of these other assets, the other store values, et cetera, but also the total pie is going to grow. The Fed's balance sheet was literally, $900 billion in 2009. It's almost 9 trillion now, a 10 bagger over like a 12, 13 year period. And so like, if that's happening over a decade to the legacy markets, well, what the hell is going to happen when Bitcoin's eating into market share, right? And also the whole pie's growing. Like, good luck trying to predict how big this thing's going to get, because I don't think any of us can do that.
Yeah. Well, I want to ask you something, because when we were in Miami, you talked about the 3D printed gun and how that case got settled. So I think that there's obviously free speech. Free speech ends at a certain point. I mean, you can't yell fire at a movie theater. You can't have like you can't like code nuclear stuff on your like computer, I guess. I don't know what the laws are around it, but there's a certain point where it ends. Do you see a world in which the United States starts to say, okay, it's actually eating into too much market share and we're going to cut that off?
I think that there will be people who will try to politicize, who will try to point at, who will try to, attack, be abrasive, whatever kind of description you want to use. Ultimately, I think that stuff will be futile, mainly because what you are going to see is that everyone gets orange pill. Everyone realizes Bitcoin is good for business, but it's not Bitcoin. Bitcoin is the manifestation of an idea that is literally centuries or thousands of years old. Sound money.
Mm.
If you boil down the biggest problems in the world in a first principles way, you can draw a direct line back to the corruption of money. When you give power to someone to go ahead and create money and debase it, they will do it. Their financial incentive is to debase the currency because it makes them wealthier. And so ultimately what you have to do is you have to create a different system. That's what we have here. And I actually think that the politicians, the nation states, they all know this. It's all the writings on the wall. It's just a matter of when do they actually admit it publicly? When do they capitulate? When do they go and adopt it? And, game theory says those that do it earlier benefit more. Let's see what happens.
Yeah, makes sense. Let me, to kind of like abstract it a little bit, in terms of that conversation and kind of adoption again, more broadly, what do you think roles, or like, how do you think like influencers and like athletes play a role in all this, right? I feel like at the end of the day, politicians, businessmen, teachers, general men and women of the, American society, they go, oh, I love sports. I really respect the sports person. I want to be in the same room as those people. How important do you think those people will be in these conversations? I think they're going to be massively, massively important because people love going to a sports game or whatever, but I'm curious to get your take on it.
Yeah, I think there's two different types of folks that fall in these buckets. So there's like what I'll consider people who are traditional celebrities, athletes, musicians, famous for whatever reason, kind of in the entertainment industry, all that. Then there are people who, let's just call them like internet folks, right? Who build these large platforms, whether it's on Instagram, Twitter, podcast, whatever. I actually think that the internet folks are going to be more important over time than the kind of traditional celebrities. Yeah. But when people use the terminology influencer, I always ask, like, take me for an example. Am I an entrepreneur? Am I an investor? Am I an influencer? I don't know. Who cares? Right? It's just like they're all merging together. People are going to build products and services as an entrepreneur would. They're going to allocate capital as an investor would. They're going to have audience, right? Because they're doing things on the internet. So that's like an influencer, whatever. But like, I joke and I'm like, no, you know what that is? That's just a winner. That's a winner on the internet, in the next 20 years. And so like, I think that you see that with like, take Joe Rogan. Is Joe Rogan an influencer? Is he actually a businessman? Is he an investor? What is he? Is he a political commentator? Like, I don't know. He's a winner. And then if you go to like the other side of the aisle, right? Like take who would be somebody that AOC is a great example. Is AOC a politician? Is AOC an influencer? Is AOC a businesswoman? It's kind of like all of it together, right? Like you just get this whole kind of combination. And so I think that's on the internet. When you look at the traditional celebrities, I think what they're starting to realize is that like this is merely a platform to build audience, to build wealth, and then you've got to have a second career. And the years of, everyone goes broke because we're all idiots and we spend a bunch of money and nobody teaches us what to do with our money across all of those industries, sports, music, etc. Those are gone. For the most part, a lot of these guys don't go broke anymore, right? A lot of these women don't go broke anymore. What they end up doing is they end up actually being pretty intelligent. And so naturally they look at themselves and they say, okay, I bet on myself in my sport or in my music or in this kind of entertainment field. Now I need to bet on myself when I get done. I either need to go get a good job. I need to be an entrepreneur. I need to be an investor. And they're just learning it earlier and earlier and earlier. Same thing we're seeing in tech. Entrepreneurs are becoming entrepreneurs earlier and earlier and earlier, technology enabled. But those same kids that are 12 years old were shoveling snow or raking leaves or mowing grass or doing lemonade stands or whatever. Now they just have a computer. Now they have a smartphone. Now they have Shopify or Amazon or whatever. It's all just moving earlier and earlier and earlier because the friction to the knowledge and the friction to the tools to do this stuff has been drastically removed. And so naturally what you get is you get an expansion of the market of who can actually participate. Older and younger people start to come in, all different wealth kind of statuses, education statuses, geography. It's just a market expansion, which is ultimately a net positive for the world.
I don't know your stance, Pomp, to be honest, on education. But I do know that the number one job that people that kids want in America right now is actually being a YouTube influencer. You contrast that with China, and it's being an astronaut. I'm sure you know about that. Look, there's like a war on college right now, and I don't know where you stand on that, but do you think that it's a good or a bad thing that kids these days are starting earlier? Now they want to be entertainers on YouTube rather than maybe in STEM fields.
I don't think it's any different than when kids want to be movie stars or athletes or anything else, right? It's just that it seems weird because it isn't the like traditional method. But what is the difference between somebody saying, hey, I want to be a journalist and go work at the New York Times or Wall Street Journal, and people would kind of golf clap for him and say, that's so great of you, you should go be that journalist. And now somebody's like, yo, I'm going to go fire off shit post on Twitter. Yeah. It's still, you're creating content on the internet, right? And by the way, you're competing. The New York Times journalist is competing with the meme lord. And like the New York Times journalists don't want to admit that. And the meme lord thinks too low of themselves, but ultimately they're competing for the audience's attention. And so naturally what you get is like, they're playing in the same league. They're playing the same game. It's an attention game. And the YouTubers competing with Netflix. Doesn't sound that way. Getting a Netflix deal sounds cooler. Going on television sounds cooler. But the YouTubers doing the same thing. And so ultimately what you get is you're getting democratized access. Now there is still some legitimacy that comes from television or movies or, you know, a publication, whatever. And there is obviously a difference between a meme lord and a true journalist who's going and doing, you know, as unbiased as a human can do. But guess what? Russia invaded Ukraine. And what did Ukraine do? They didn't fire rockets back at Russia. They literally posted a meme of Hitler and Putin on their official account. And so like now all of a sudden we have nation states that are literally posting memes as part of disinformation or information campaigns, however you want to look at it, during a time of war. Like the world's changing fast and people got to wake the hell up because that YouTuber is actually going to be the most important person. Last night I saw, I forget the gentleman's name. I think it's Hassan Abi or something, who is, people call him Hassan. I forget his last name, on Twitch. He went live while all this was happening. He had 120,000 people concurrently watching. That's as big as like CNBC gets for their morning business show. And he literally is sitting there just like pulling up stuff on the screen, whatever. Like, why is that guy end up being so influential? It's because people trust them, whether you think that's good or bad or whatever. And so like, guess what? He's the genius because he doesn't need 35 people to turn on the camera and go live. He pressed a button on his computer and it's got 120,000 people. Like, good for him. So now all of a sudden to be a Twitch streamer, like he probably makes more money than half of the talking heads on TV.
So
such facts. God, there's going to be so many good clips, so much heat there. All right. I think we're about at time here. Hunter, before we get out of here, do you have any other questions for Pomp here?
No, man, I just appreciate you coming on. I told you right before the show started, this whole thing actually started because of you. We met up with you and you told us the free, code is free speech, and you got some really good insights on Bitcoin. So we're hoping that this is the first episode. So we just appreciate you coming on and doing this with us.
Let's do it, man. You guys are doing a great job. I enjoy listening and I appreciate you having me.
Absolutely. Pomp, real fast before we get out of here, where should people go? Where should people find you?
Just go to Twitter. It is the easiest thing. You go to Twitter. I shill enough shit on there that you'll find everything else.
His Twitter is hilarious for everybody listening and watching. So go check it out. All right, Pomp, always a blessing. Good talking to you, brother. Appreciate you. We'll talk to you soon.
All right. Sounds good, guys.
Thanks, man.